process all the way to our distribution and our downs forwarded to the beer industry and the spirits category. We were given the excerpt coming from the excise policy, which I've highlighted in the third bullet point on page 57, that wine has a preferential treatment in the excise policy based on its macroeconomic performance or its socioeconomic contribution to the country. What we fundamentally want to highlight, Chair, and to the honourable members, is that the crux of our draft tax rate, our contribution to the draft rates bill is to not only speak to what had transpired during the tabling of the budget and the tax proposals tabled on the excise duties and the increase thereof, but we'd like to point out in particular there are some fundamental inconsistencies in the excise framework that are emanating and showing themselves in the excise adjustment that we think need to be addressed, both and in conjunction with what is being tabled from the draft tax rates bill by the Minister and through the National Treasury. We would like to highlight 2 points in particular that we note as inconsistencies in the excise policy. One of the key principles of excise policy in South Africa is, first of all, to raise taxes for the government and for the fiscus. Secondly, to deal with alcohol harm reduction. We have noted the discrepancy in the way in which excise has been levied as a system. So the excise policy has existed since 2014. In 2 budget cycles, the Minister has said that this will be reviewed. It has been 8 years since the empirical evidence and the rationale for the excise policy that currently guides the alcohol category has been reviewed, and we think that these inconsistencies present themselves in the excise adjustment and overall in the way that excise taxes are levied on the alcohol category. In particular, we notice that the beer industry has lower ABV products, lower alcohol content products, and yet we charge higher excise taxes, and where other categories have higher alcohol content products but are charged lower excise taxes and obviously are obtaining opportunity to not pay as much excise as other categories. A further inconsistency in the excise policy is that beer and spirits, as well as ciders are also charged excise taxes on an alcohol content basis. This is aligned to the WHO, the World Health Organization, public policy design and recommendations on excise policy that the formulation of excise policy should be based on an alcohol content basis. But we see this contrary, where both traditional beer and wine are levied excise on a per litre basis, contrary to some of the public policy and public health research coming out from global bodies. We would like to also raise another recommendation, given the space of excise policy and what has transpired over time since the 2014 excise policy framework had been amended. What we have seen in the graph that I am showing on my screen is that since the 2014 excise policy, we have only seen 1 year, Chair, where the excise policy was in line with inflation. Since then, it has been volatile, differentiated, and has departed from the principles and framework in the excise policy. Now, this has created uncertainty for our business, Chair, and we believe that at every moment when the Minister of Finance tables the excise policy, there is great uncertainty and has made it difficult for us to plan for the year in particular, as well as to plan in the future for investments. So how can we reduce the uncertainty in the budget cycle? We have noted here that the MTBPS plays a critical role in the entire budgetary process, and it sets the foundation and the tone for the fiscal framework going into the national budget. It is focused in particular on providing projections for inflation, for unemployment, and balance of trade. What we do notice, however, Chair, is that the MTBPS is very much slanted towards the reprioritization of the MTEF, the medium-term expenditure framework, and it doesn't give an opportunity to table tax proposals. We believe that as a legislative framework that is critical and a critical point of the budget cycle, they should be given an opportunity to anchor the outlook on tax proposals in the budget cycle, in particular in the MTBPS, that would reduce, for instance, the volatility and the tax uncertainty we have received in the excise policy space. Just to round up, Chair, some of our three key points coming out of our submission and in total in this oral submission is to firstly say that there is inconsistency fundamentally in the excise policy. We believe, and guided by global institutions and best practice coming from where countries are heading towards in a new frontier on excise policy, that all alcohol categories should be levied excise on an alcohol content basis. This will not only show itself and reveal itself in the way the excise adjustment takes place, but it will remove the current preferential treatment that takes place in the excise framework and which is emanated in the excise adjustment. Secondly, we believe this move would not only be simple for SARS to administer and also has the opportunity to be revenue raising, given a workshop with both SARS and National Treasury to see these opportunities take place. We also believe that it is also part and parcel of reducing red tape and other forms of supply side constraints that businesses are faced with as part of the President's commitment to really driving and pushing forward bottlenecks or reducing bottlenecks to investments and growth in the country. Lastly, Chair, I think a certainty and a key part of the excise adjustment and the volatility thereof across the different budget cycle annual budget cycle presentations and the tabling of tax proposals in this regard has been that it has been outside of the excise policy framework guidelines and it has made it difficult for the beer industry and SAB in particular to plan. We would suggest that the budget cycle and in particular the MTBPS take into consideration fixing the excise adjustment and the tabling of tax proposals in particular that would allow an excise rate to be fixed and in line with inflation and forecasted within the medium-term budget space. This would not only give us an opportunity to create certainty for our business, but in general, it would reduce the volatility that is currently emanating from the excess adjustment that takes place during the tax proposals tabled by the Minister of Finance. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you so much. That was Ms. Banda from SAB, and I think there is this strong feeling about how the wines are treated with kid gloves. Ms. Banda, I wonder why the wines are treated with kid gloves. But thank you so much for your input. That takes care of the stakeholders' inputs on the first tax bill, which is TALAB. Honorable members, this brings us to an opportunity for members' interaction with the stakeholders' input, comments, or clarity-seeking questions. We always know that the responses really will come from Treasury. Can I have a look at whose hand is up? Honorable members. Sorry. Maybe while we're waiting for members to raise their hands, I seem to be hearing throughout the presentations that stakeholders feel that they should be treated in the same way in terms of tax expectations. But my fundamental question, which I think Sharon overemphasized as she was presenting for SAICA. My question is whether the different stakeholders have a similar impact, especially on the country's economy, and whether the different stakeholders have had an opportunity to make an alternative proposition to Treasury. I say that, for instance, Lizelle from CISA, they do want their day with Treasury. And I'm also hoping that they will get their day. Sorry, but for them, I have a question around the timing of the phase-in period. Now, sorry, whether, because they are stating it for a fact that at some point, Treasury sympathizes with them, Treasury sees their point of view, and Treasury seems to want to come closer to them, which is a good one for me. But I just want to check, as Lizelle was presenting, as to whether the 10-year, because that's what they are proposing, the 10-year phase-in period, is it not too long a period? Or, well, if they could probably come closer to what Treasury is proposing, what would then be their proposal and why, maybe? And Asanda, I just want to talk to the issue of the vapor products. And I was a bit confused at the beginning because of the age that you seemed to be mentioning, which was 15. Correct me if I got you incorrectly, because you again went on to talk about age 18 as the ideal age for people to be considered adult enough to be able to take wise and informed decisions. With vapor, you present not smoking, as it doesn't carry the infamous nicotine. However, for you, I would like to really assist me in checking or sharing with us what monitoring tool you might be having in your own organization. I'm asking this question because we have seen, I'm sure you have too, there was a video that was doing the rounds of a small kid. The kid could have been anything between 5 or 8 years, but the kid was vapor smoking. And I mean, it was not a good picture to watch. And one is interested to know if, for instance, the vapor smoking is less dangerous. Can we talk to its danger? Because if it's less dangerous, it says there is some element of danger in it, but not as dangerous as nicotine. So just clear us here as to what is it that we are looking at. Do we have a safe way of smoking? I see my chairperson is back on. He was kicked out by the load shedding. I'll take the hand of the chairperson, and I'll take the hand of Kenny, Honorable Morolong, and I'll also take Honorable Mabileta in that order. I will not speak in between the members. You just come in, Comrade Honorable Chairperson. You'll be followed by Kenny and then Dorothy Mabileta. Chair.
Okay, thanks, Comrade Noxie. I also want to ask a clarity-seeking question, and you will proceed to check because I've got a problem of network here. We are affected by load shedding, so I'm using the Galaxy what phone. USA and others have raised a very critical matter here. I think we're at the right time. National Treasury will have to explain this, because I don't understand. We are a sovereign country. Then we refer to foreign currencies to make a reference or base our rates. Why do that? Even though I'm not expecting Treasury to do that, can Busa, who spoke on this matter, expand and others as to why are we making reference to? You are raising a serious concern that you wouldn't like in a legislation that we make things in a manner that we refer to the dollar instead of to the rand. Can you expand on that so that when we engage the National Treasury, they are able to explain themselves next time when we meet them? Because I also have a serious concern here. The dollar is not the only currency for exchange in the world today. There are other currencies which are rising very strongly: the yen, the euro, the ruble, and many others. And so I would like stakeholders to touch a bit on this matter so as to empower us as to what is their view in regard to a dollar-denominated rate. Thank you, Chair. Thanks.
Orolo?
Well, thank you very much. I was a bit ambivalent about asking this question, especially because it is not related to taxation, but I think I was driven by the fact that you yourself had asked it, and it's about the safety of these vape products. Chair, health consequences of tobacco are known. They have been widely and publicly ventilated from time immemorial. We've heard from presentations that electronic nicotine and non-nicotine are harm reduced, but we've also heard that retailers create their own electronic nicotine liquid. How is this regulated, Chair, to guarantee safety of the product? And for consumption purpose, Chair, how safe are these do-it-yourselves products? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kenny. Honorable Mabilet.
Thank you, Chair. I'm also going to just continue where Honorable Morolo said, because it is really a concern. Most of the abuse, related, they are related to alcohol consumption, abuse and stuff like that. And we are concerned that, and now of lately, even our young people, as young as 12 years, they are consuming alcohol, tobacco, and vapor as well. So then I'm just asking, is there any type of education? Because I know that on the content you have written not to be consumed under this certain age, but is there a way that perhaps they can be educated so that if they are going to do that, they must know that it is their decision? Because if there's not going to be some sort of education, I think now, and we're even labeled, our young people are even labeled to know where it's like a country where we can consume alcohol, nothing else, or tobacco, or now it's vapor. It is a huge concern. What can be done so that they are educated? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Honorable Mabidetsa. In the absence of any other hand from the members, can I now give over to the stakeholders for some responses? Sorry. Can we start anybody who wants to come in, because sometimes some of the questions cut across, like the question that was asked by the chairperson.
Can I go with the question asked for the long-term insurance industry about the longer phasing in period we proposed on 17? Okay.
Sure, go ahead. Go ahead.
Sure. Thank you. Important point we wanted to make is that the 6-year phasing in period is too short. If you look at the contract lengths of our business, it can span up to 50 years. And we receive the cash flows for those contracts over the lifetime of the policies. So we need alignment between the phasing in period and the period of our contract durations. That is the ideal situation. And we're not asking for 50 years. We're asking for longer than 6 years. IFRS 17 is also a huge impact on the industry. It impacts every insurer. It impacts small insurers. It impacts large insurers. Impacts medium insurers. And therefore, it really, really is a big impact on the industry. And the transition can also lead to a surplus or deficit, which means that a longer phasing in period will protect the fiscus as well as the industry. It's not only the industry, but also the fiscus that is protected from this. So if you ask me, if we can move closer to National Treasury, I would say a longer phasing in period than 6 years. If they don't want to provide 10 years, a longer phasing in period than 6 years would also be acceptable to the industry. I don't know if that answers your questions. If there's any other questions, please feel free to ask.
Okay, thank you. I think that will be sufficient. If members have follow-ups, we will deal with that later. Thank you so much for your responses. Ms. Joy?
Thank you, ma'am, for the opportunity to respond. I think I'd like to just provide clarity on the age matter. So the rationale that was given by National Treasury for wishing to impose the excise was because they said they wanted to discourage the use of vaping products by young people, which they said was they said that it was high. So what I meant by that statistic from the Global Adults Tobacco Survey was that currently we do not have a clear picture in South Africa as to what the numbers are where youth vaping is concerned. When you look at the age that we denote as youth and access to products, we say that access to products to people under the age of 18 is illegal. So from a vaping industry point of view, what we have done in the absence of regulation is self-regulate, because like everyone here, we are also concerned about getting young people addicted to nicotine, which is the substance that is found in vaping products, same as tobacco products, as well as tobacco heated products. I'll come to the differences, ma'am, on these different products. But what is important to note, what we are saying is that we cannot regulate on a conception that there might be a youth vaping pandemic in South Africa. What we are disputing is that there is no youth vaping pandemic crisis in South Africa. However, the mere fact that young people are able to access these products is a cause of concern for the industry. And what we have done as an industry body in the absence of regulation is self-regulate. And amongst those tools that we are using is we have a youth access prevention campaign, which runs annually, where I think there was someone who asked about education that we put out there on these products, where we are quite clear that our members, Vipassana members, members will not sell to people under the age of 18. So you've got age verification gates on websites, credit cards that are used to pay. The assumption is that these belong to adults, so you cannot process a payment of a credit card on the system, unless you've got these age gates. Number two, we also have put in place delivery mechanisms where the delivery person may refuse to deliver a product if the person receiving the package is under the age of 18. At shops, there is clear signage that we do not sell to persons under the age of 18. But more than that, what we've done is to incorporate other elements. This is from our own accord as the vaping industry. A particular issue that was raised to us as a concern was the issue of packaging, where it was said that some of the packaging of vaping products may be seen to appeal to young people, the use of cartoons, the use of sweets and those kinds of things. So we've put, again, self-regulation where Vipasa members have pledged that they will do away with that kind of packaging, because ultimately who we are targeting is adult smokers who are looking for a less harmful alternative. Of late as well, what we've done is we've joined the Advertising Regulatory Board as an association, because again, we want to ensure that the messaging the content we put out there in advertising is not deemed or seen to be directing young people. So that's another self-regulatory measure that we've put in place. And another important step that the industry has taken is to work with the SABS in developing product standards for the industry. This process is currently underway, and we are very, very optimistic that it will move very swiftly, because again, like has been said by a number of people here, we too are concerned about the safety, especially when it comes to self-mixing of e-liquid. And I must add, in those instances where there is self-mixing, those are not legal businesses. Those are individuals who take this up as a hobby. We get complaints and we escalate the matter. But what is important in this area of work, which I think everyone appreciates, is that this is a collective responsibility in ensuring that, one, young people do not have access to these products. Where there are rogue vendors or rogue retailers that do sell to people under the age of 18, we need to be reporting them to the association. And when it comes to our attention, we do act on those reports that we do get. And in an additional thing, on the tools that we use, we've employed every 2 months a mystery shopper. So what we do is randomly from our members, we partnered with an organization that does mystery shopping. They go out there and see if all these tools and guidelines that we've put in place as an industry body are being adhered to. What I must stress, though, is that not every business in South Africa is a part of Vipasa. And we suspect some are not, because Vipasa members have pledged that they will, agree to the code of conduct and agree to what we deem as necessary punitive measures when people do not do what is expected of them. So it's really important to understand that with any industry, you will have those rogue elements. We need to just ensure that the education component is really amplified in ensuring that our products do not fall into the wrong hands. And very quickly on the differences between the video you spoke about of the young person, a child rather, who was using some device, that is not vaping. So in the risk continuum, you've got tobacco, cigarettes, where there's combustion. You've got what they call hubbly bubblies that contain the coal and still tobacco, and there's still combustion there. And then you have the tobacco heated products, which do not combust, so it doesn't burn. And at the bottom of the risk spectrum, you've got vaping products. And the issue of whether they are safe or not, I think is better understood in comparison to tobacco, because we understand that people smoke because they're addicted to the nicotine, but they die from the combustion. vaping eliminates that combustion process. So it's really important to understand that when you think about vaping, look at it from a risk continuum, which then gives you an idea of the risk profile of the category, which is what we are talking about. Hence, we are driving the concept of harm reduction as an important public policy agenda that South Africa ought to look at. Our submission goes into far more detail in terms of the differences and the risk and safety profile of our products. I think I will leave it there, ma'am, if that is okay.
And yeah, I think you have sufficiently covered it. Thank you so much. And now I'll give the opportunity to Happy. Happy Kambule has raised her hand to respond. If anyone wants to make a response, stakeholders, could you kindly raise your hand on the platform? Thank you very much. Happy?
Yes, thank you, Chair. So I'll respond to the question around what the sentiment, or rather what's the understanding from National Treasury on making the price, the headline price, dollar linked or dollar based. We can't speak as BUSA on why Treasury did that. I mean, there were some reasoning that it was given in our recent engagement when we had a public consultation, but those don't stand ground, because there's a number of aspects I think honorable members need to understand. There's companies that are South African based, not multinational companies. These are ones that are coming from South Africa and do have an export market that they are participating in. And then there's companies that are only wholly South African, and then there are companies which are coming from obviously outside and also based in South Africa. So we are looking at the carbon tax as only applying within South Africa and not necessarily linked to any other jurisdiction in the world. Some carbon taxes are linked to other jurisdictions, and that might necessitate some form of a currency that they may be pegged to, that may be linked to, but that's only in regards to countries that have linked some form of carbon pricing methodology or some form of mechanism that is there. And that's okay in that circumstance, but that's not the case in South Africa, right? And then secondly, the concerns around sovereignty, I think from our perspective, it's really about confidence, and the confidence not only in that there is a market in South Africa, that there is business in South Africa that's trying to undertake particular changes, but also confidence in the fact that South African business can plan ahead and can make the necessary investments in line with what is affordable. And you've heard from PwC, you've heard from SAICA that as soon as you link the South African rand to something like the dollar, the linking of those two is highly volatile. And any given point in time, it can be an ebb and flow of whether or not the price increases much substantially or reduces at a substantial rate. So that gives a great degree of unpredictability. So in our understanding that if the currency is volatile or the link is volatile and is is variable in its design, it does not give a sense of confidence and certainty in what we will need to do. And the mere fact that even the current draft of the EM that Treasury has shared is that we need to ensure predictability. The policy landscape and the framework in itself needs to ensure predictability, and that's the line we're coming from. What we are clear about is that we understand that most of the technologies that are coming into South Africa for us to be able to do our mitigation options, so to reduce emissions and to ensure that we're moving in line with the whole just transition and the transition to lower carbon economy, is going to come from outside of South Africa. But there are other mechanisms and means in order to make sure that we get those in here. What is more crucial is that we have predictability on price and how we can plan around those investments. Secondly, is that when the technologies are there, we are able to deploy them with the funds that can be ring-fenced, that can be facilitated, whether it's from the state or whether it's from internally, by ourselves and within a context that is scalable within the context that we're working in. And having a link to the dollar doesn't necessarily give us that kind of certainty. There are other considerations that talk about whether or not we can lead on to the foreign reserves. What does that mean in terms of our exchange controls? And we just don't have the bandwidth for that at this current moment in time whilst we are applying the carbon tax in the first phase. So for this particular period of time and for the foreseeable future, we should stay within the band of just having it in rand terms. That's clear for everybody. We've gotten used to that, and it's much easier for us to actually fulfill the kinds of liabilities that we've been placed with. Over, Chair.
Okay. Okay, now that we're done, can we get Patricia Pillay? Patricia, can I humbly give you like 3 minutes? We're running out of time. People are passionate about their work that they're doing. So please, can I give you 3 minutes?
Thank you, Chair. And I just wanted to support, Chair, thank you, the request in terms of engaging with Treasury. We as the beer industry are very open to engaging with Treasury. We have sent a few requests, so we are here, especially about the technicalities that we'd like to discuss. But just in response to the social responsibility, we work on a national level with various partnerships with the national departments as well as provincial departments, and a lot of our spend is there with communities. And I'm not talking just urban areas, in deep rural communities as well, where the problems exist. This is a societal problem. And what we found, we were just in the communities last week, was that people are drinking because they have stress, they are depressed, they are hungry, and they then turn to these alternatives. They also feel peer pressure as well. And that is why we're also pushing our low and our no alcohol category a lot. You will see the campaigns that have been coming through. And that's why, Chair and members, we are pushing the ABV taxation. I think for us, it's very important to stress this point that if you have a lower alcohol by volume, surely there should be a reward for that because you are pushing social responsibility. If I have a product like a beer, which is a 5%, I should not be then taxed at 5.5, whereas my other category, which is a higher volume of a 12%, gets taxed to 4.5. That does not make sense. So for us, Chair, it really is that we are passionate about making sure that the product is enjoyed responsibly. We are contributing to employment and we are contributing to the economy and to the fiscus, but the playing fields must be leveled. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you so much. That takes care of the first part of the interaction on TLAB. Now we're off to TLAB. And the first stakeholder on the line is the World Wildlife Forum or World Wildlife Fund. Yes, they are a fund. Can we give it to them at this time? Please, let's stick to the 10 minutes. And if you go beyond the 10 minutes, can I be excused in advance? I am going to stop you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And just a point of correction, it's the Worldwide Fund for Nature, but this is an easy mistake to make. Would it be okay if I was to share my presentation?
Welcome, Assistance Tebogo.
I have. Thank you. So just a quick point, I will try to make some time for my colleagues in civil society because there was very little opportunity for them to participate. There was no notice, and they we're hoping that they will also be able to make a short follow-up within my 10 minutes. So thank you, Chair. I think what's important for us to say and what is not said in terms of the carbon tax is we need to think of also, we are very cognizant to the position of business that it can be an onerous and challenging tax liability, but we also need to bear in mind very, very seriously the timelines we're operating under. We don't have extended timelines in which to do this decarbonization. The International Panel of Climate Change has pointed out that we will be passing that 1.5 degrees threshold within the next 10 years, most likely. And that means that some of these what are called tipping points, points at which we start getting runaway climate change are likely to start kicking in at that point as well. And this is very, very important to bear in mind, because what it points to is actually the cost of our continued emissions here. So all of these here are likely to start accelerating climate change, and actually the potential for the biosphere to remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere is reduced. And that is a big problem, because that means that even as we start to reduce our emissions, the amount that goes into the atmosphere will be increased because it's not being removed by the biosphere. So the long and short of it is that every continued ton of carbon dioxide that we do put out is a bill that we are going to... Sorry, you should just mute yourself there. Is a bill that we as society are going to pay. This is not an option. And currently the best estimates of that actual cost is somewhere in the range of $185 per ton. So this is a very recent assessment that is trying to get better estimates of the damage that climate is likely to impact, and specifically on economic growth and on economies, from the US National Academies of Science, Engineering and Medicine, using their recommendations. And it is essentially something that, if we look here at the kind of the detail of it, regarding kind of discount rates, this doesn't look at the specific damages of extreme weather events. This is just kind of reduced growth, impact on agriculture, on mortality. So to put that into perspective, a carbon tax of $20 to $30 actually means that society is effectively subsidizing those emissions to the tune of 2,600 Rand per ton of carbon dioxide in perpetuity. And there's a price. This is not a way, there's no way to avoid that. Now, if you compare that to the actual pricing that we're talking about, it's clear that we're not trying to internalize all of those costs. What the carbon tax is designed to do is to try and incentivize change, to make it feasible for these companies to make change. And the prices that are recommended for the developing world in 2020 are sort of $40, and from the High Level Commission on Carbon prices at $25 from the IMF. And in 2030, we're looking at 50 to 75. And if you look in comparison at the prices that we're putting forward in South Africa, they're significantly lower. Even making provision for the fact that we're developing nations and that we have a special circumstance, the whole world has gone through COVID and is currently restructuring. Nevertheless, the price point is critical. And so WWF actually urges that we think about increasing that carbon pricing in the 2030 time horizon, bearing in mind the near sort of concerns. So and when we think about the allowances, we know that Treasury is going to continue to have allowances, and this is an important factor of ensuring that we can still maintain certain sectors in the transition, make sure that we do a just transition. But with the current allowances, the effective carbon price will still only be $1 to $2 per ton at the end of the first phase, which is significantly lower than recommendations, and it is not high enough to incentivize any change. And we can see that it's not high enough because we haven't seen significant investment in transformation in many of these industries. So we recommend that the basic allowance be removed, and that any new allowances have to be predicated on actual action for decarbonization. It is important that we see this decarbonization. And also, when we talk about getting to net zero, which is a critical target for South Africa, which we have articulated by 2050, that means that we need to grow the negative emissions, which not just avoiding our emissions, but actually trying to grow the removals. And the primary way that that can be done within South Africa is through restoring degraded land, but that is a very limited pool. And that means that if we are considering that as an offset allowance in any manner, that can only be for those sectors that are critical to the economy and that for which we cannot avoid the emissions. So that really speaks to cement, which we need for building, which has process emissions that cannot be avoided. And and to a lesser extent for steel, where we can in the future implement direct reduction through green hydrogen, but at the moment we don't have that online. A point about the sort of the carbon border adjustments and the carbon pricing in US dollars. So at the moment, 24% of the whole world's emissions are under some form of carbon price, and lots of jurisdictions are looking to impose them. And a critical element that we're seeing is the border carbon adjustment. So the EU is going to impose a tax effectively on any imported products from across the world in line with their EU ETS starting in 2026. This is currently against steel, cement, fertilizer, aluminium, but they're looking to expand the scope also to chemicals and polymers and to indirect emissions for those, which means that anything, and we've seen a similar bill passed or proposed in the US, so lots of other jurisdictions are likely to take this on. So any of these products that we export going into those jurisdictions will already have that carbon price on them, and the importers in those countries will be paying that price to the EU. So it makes no difference in terms of our access either way, we are going to have that. But if we have the tax in South Africa, it means that that money goes into our fiscus and can be recycled to help the process of our just transition. And it also means that the price points will drive the reduction within South Africa. So it makes a strong move, and it helps us retain our access to those markets. And if we think about the price points that we're already seeing in the EU ETS, at the moment, we've gone over the last year from about $30 to over $60. Those are significantly higher than at this point. And that is one of the rationales, and we support the fact that we are trying to think about pegging it against the US dollar. And so broadly, we're in support of the tax amendment and the extension of the energy efficiency incentive, the extension of the price neutrality, which is critical, although government has to have stronger policy measures to decarbonize the electricity sector. I'd just like to hand over quickly to my colleague from Just Chair, Robin Hugo, to give a quick word, and also to say that the Green Connection from civil society supports our input.
Thank you. Good morning.
Your friend has 2 minutes. Dear friend, you have 2 minutes only.
Thank you for that indulgence. My name is Robin Hugo. I'm from shareholder activist organization Just Share. The position put forward as the organized business joint position on carbon tax yesterday is unsupported by experts and by climate science. Essentially, and notwithstanding delaying the tax's implementation for over a decade, the business proposes that a higher carbon price only be considered after 2035. James has explained why we need to take urgent action on climate now, and that if carbon were priced correctly so that it reflects the actual cost of emissions to society, that would be transformative in limiting the worst impacts of the climate crisis. In short, businesses' arguments ignore the socioeconomic impacts of failing to mitigate climate change, which fossil fuel operations are exacerbating with every ton of carbon dioxide emitted. If we fail to take more significant steps to reduce emissions in the short and medium term, that is going to require steeper and deeper emission reduction cuts in future, with more severe consequences for our economy and the majority of people in South Africa. Thank you, Chair.
So much. You were on point. And can I just check, because Mr. James Rela, we have World Wildlife Fund, SA, for the name of your organization. And you are correcting it to say?
Apologies for that. We are the Worldwide Fund for Nature.
For nature. Okay,
That's
sure.
correct.
Thank you so much for that. We don't want to have it incorrectly. Thank you. That takes care of WWF. And now we go on to SASLA. Thank you so much. 10 minutes.
Good morning, Honourable Chairperson, Honourable Members. I am Melissa van der Merwe and I represent the South African Securities Lending Association. We're grateful for this opportunity to present this oral submission on the collateral arrangement definition in the draft Taxation Laws Amendment Bill. I'm battling to share my screen. Please, could I be co-host so that I can share my screen?
You are co-host now, Melissa.
Thank you very much. Hopefully my screen is now showing. I think it's important just to give a little bit of context and background to the taxation of collateral assets to date. Prior to the Financial Markets Act, the only way that financial securities as collateral could be given was via the common law procedure of a cession in securitatem debiti. And this process required securities to be posted into a segregated account with no right of use of those securities for so long as the pledge was in existence. And this really had a negative impact on liquidity because those collateral assets were locked up in that segregated account for the duration of the pledge. There was also no tax impact on that arrangement because there was no outright transfer of title in the collateral securities. So no securities transfer tax and no capital gains tax was applied to the pledge arrangement. With mandatory collateral posting being implemented through regulation, it became clear that South Africa needed a legally sound way to be able to post securities as collateral, but with the right of use of those assets, so as to avoid locking up those collateral assets in these segregated accounts, as was seen under the pledge construct. And so the Financial Markets Act was instrumental in implementing Section 38, which introduced the out-and-out cession of securities. And this creates a procedure for the transfer of ownership in securities in recognition of this need to be able to have the right of use of securities and maintain liquidity. So Section 38 requires securities to be posted to the receiving party in an outright transfer of title so that ownership transfers. And in so doing, it gives the collateral taker the full right to use those securities, and that in turn ensures liquidity is maintained. However, of course, when we invoke this new structure of a transfer of ownership of securities, what happens is that we have a tax impact because when transfer happens, securities are taxed via securities transfer tax and capital gains tax. And so whilst Section 38 of the Financial Markets Act had solved the reuse problem, it had now introduced a new problem, which was a taxation of these assets. As a result, in recognition of this, the Taxation Laws Amendment Act in 2016 provided a dispensation for securities transfer tax and capital gains tax through the collateral arrangement exemption. And this dispensation was given in recognition of, firstly, the need to have a right of use of collateral assets, but secondly, that it needed to be economically viable. And this is really because when you're talking about collateral, there could potentially be daily movements of collateral assets. And if securities transfer tax and capital gains tax is imparted daily, it unsettles the economics and the viability of such a process. The dispensation with regards to STT and CGT, which is given under the Taxation Laws Amendment Act of 2016, is going to be very important and useful going forward, given the market is going to experience an increased need of collateral in the financial markets through the G20 mandate to the Basel Committee on Banking Supervision and the International Organizations of Securities Commission, which requires standards to be developed on collateral requirements to enhance protection with respect to counterparty credit risk, which in turn reduces systemic risk. These BCBS and IOSCO recommendations have been adopted in South Africa via the Joint Standard 2 of 2020 of the Financial Sector Regulation Act, which will become effective on the 16th of February 2023 and will require mandatory collateral to be posted for in-scope entities for OTC derivatives transactions. The examples that I'm going to give on this slide are just really there to show the importance of the right of reuse of collateral in our financial markets. Financial markets intermediaries like asset managers and broker-dealers use financial securities as collateral in order to secure exposures in certain transactions. And in reducing exposures, we are managing and reducing systemic risk. Locally and internationally, market participants and regulators also agree and acknowledge that the reuse of collateral is a really important source of funding, and it also helps to maintain liquidity in the financial markets. So some of the examples of how collateral is used is, firstly, we see that dealers who are able to use collateral assets will do so to raise funds through secured financing transactions, or to fulfill collateral calls in terms of their derivatives positions or transactions that they may enter into with third parties. Secondly, collateral may also be used by the party who receives that collateral for their own purposes and for their own transactions. So they may want to enter into a repurchase transaction or enter into a loan of those securities, short sales, or even being able to liquidate those collateral assets to apply against a default which has happened in the market in order to defray or mitigate their loss as a result of that default. So all these examples really show how the reuse of collateral assets enhances the benefits of collateral in mitigating systemic risk, but further than that, to actually increase the underlying market's liquidity and allowing dealers to be more efficient in how they use securities. And that in turn helps to lower the transaction costs to the market players. So just another little example to show how the current collateral, these examples that I'm going to give now are to show you how the use and reuse of collateral can effectively create collateral chains where one particular security can be used in multiple different transactions under the current taxation regime. That's under the Taxation Law Amendment of 2016. And that we can really benefit from the dispensations with regard to STT and CGT under the current regime. So in my example here, we've got asset manager 1 who posts share ABC as collateral to bank 2 for the purposes of a securities loan transaction. This would constitute a valid collateral arrangement under the 2016 Taxation Act. And so no STT or CGT would apply for a period of 24 months. In the second transaction, we see that Bank 2 uses that same share ABC in posting collateral to FSP3 for the purpose of a repo transaction. Again, that is considered a collateral arrangement. It's subject to a dispensation for STT and CGT for a period of 24 months. In transaction 3, we see FSP3 uses that same share ABC to post collateral in terms of a derivatives position to broker-dealer number 4. Again, collateral arrangement and an STT-CGT exemption for a period of 24 months. What happens in transaction 4 is interesting because we have seen in the example that FSB3 has triggered an event of default. So what broker-dealer 4 wants to do is they want to use the collateral assets in the form of that share ABC, and they want to sell that asset to Bank 5 to defray their losses as a result of the event of default that FSP3 has triggered. And when they do that, that does not constitute a transaction which is subject to STT and CGT dispensation, and therefore STT and CGT will apply to that fourth transaction. That is how the current taxation law applies.
And in conclusion, Melissa?
The collateral arrangement definition is amended in the TLAB such that the way it's drafted is that the reuse of collateral forms part of the exception or exclusion, and in so doing creates an unintended consequence of excluding all previous compliant collateral arrangements from the STT-CGT exemption. So via my diagram here, the minute that under the proposed amendment in the TLAB, when that sale of share ABC happens, instead of STT-CGT only applying to that transaction, it actually retrospectively applies STT and CGT to all previous transactions 1, 2, and 3, such that the market players, through no decision of their own, are now subject to a tax that they had not taken into consideration. And it is therefore SASLA's submission, in conclusion, that including the reuse of collateral prohibition in the TLAB as a proviso to the definition would have the required effect of ensuring that that clarifying any arrangement that fails to meet the collateral arrangement definition would not benefit from STT, but that any prior compliant transactions would continue to benefit from STT and CGT dispensations. And I think that the concern is that if this amendment is not made, it will force the market to either revert to using cash only as collateral, which could cause a liquidity squeeze, or could revert to using that pledge construct, which locks up the collateral assets and again limits the right of reuse.
Thank you, Melissa. Thank you. Point taken, my dear. I'm so sorry to do this to you, but no I'm problem. Hoping that you were indeed concluding as you said you were. I'm sorry for that, but thanks so much for your presentation. The next stakeholder to present is Sasol, and they have asked Beauty to be made a co-host, and I'm hoping that you have been able to do that for them. The name is Mkolisi. Over to you, Sasol. Get on the work on your presentation. We can see on the screen. Your 10 minutes starts now.
Thank you kindly. I will be sharing the presentation. However, Henry Rousseau will be will be speaking on our behalf. Is he able to unmute?
Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you, Henry.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair, honourable members. It's a privilege to be here presenting Sasol today. We're presenting on the proposed carbon tax amendments. Just a big thank you to the engagement. I think there's been a constructive engagement from National Treasury on the matter, which we believe is of critical importance, not only to industries in South Africa, but more broadly the South African economy and the people of South Africa. Just to introduce some of my key colleagues also on the line, we've got Vio Kala. He's our Executive Director of Sasol and Head of Strategy. Also Charlotte Mokoena, she's EVP of HR and Stakeholder Relations. And also my colleague Priscilla Mabulane, she's EVP of our energy business. Thank you. The next slide, please. Just in summary, what you will hear today is firstly that Sasol is on track to already reduce our greenhouse gas emissions by 2030 by 30%. And we are absolutely committed to a green transition of our business and also to support a green transition of the South African economy. We believe we play a critical role in the broader transition of the South African economy. Secondly, the proposed carbon tax does render Sasol unviable by 2029, and I'll share some analysis which was also confirmed by independent market analysts. Thirdly, and I think this is important, we believe that the carbon tax should be integrated into broader climate change policy, and this should balance people, planet, and profit. And that's an important aspect as we not only face a looming global climate crisis, but South Africa is today facing significant unemployment. We've got a poverty crisis, we've got an economic growth crisis, and this all needs to be balanced in more broadly in any legislation that we consider. Fourthly, we believe that any trajectory of increased carbon tax and regulations should be synchronized with mitigation measures. I think some of the other submissions also spoke about the availability of mitigation measures, but they should recognize that the world is currently in a global energy crisis, and the availability of mitigation measures, whether it's technology, solar panels, these are significantly impeded at the moment. And we're seeing significant U-turns in policy in the Western world, Europe, in Europe, for example. Lastly, we are proposing that allowances and incentives should be part of a suite of enabling policy. So let's not just do a carbon tax as a stick that will deindustrialize South Africa, but let's also consider carrots to reindustrialize the green economy in South Africa and to ensure that there's a proper and a just transition. Next slide, please. I'm not going to go through the detail, but I think we all realize that Sasol is a strong contributor to the South African economy. We're about 20% owned by government through the PIC and the IDC. And although we're mostly based in South Africa, we have a global business with operations in 22 countries and employ kind of nearly 30,000 people. Perhaps just to note, we've got operations in the US. At the moment, we don't pay any carbon tax in the US. We also have operations in Europe, where our current carbon tax is actually dwarfed by our current South African carbon tax. We're paying significantly higher taxes in South Africa because of European the countries allowing significantly more offsets. There's mitigation measures available in Europe. And I think we've got to carefully consider what is just for South Africa in terms of a carbon tax proposal. Importantly, Sasol has approved 15 to 25 billion rand already to decarbonize our business. And this supports and actually exceeds the lower end of South Africans' NDC. We're also a major player in investing in future green hydrogen and low carbon growth projects. So, for example, our Buchubai study that's looking at a big hydrogen project in the Northern Cape is a key part of what we see beyond 2030 as a solution for South Africa. So in short, we believe that the carbon tax puts our base business and this transition at risk. Next slide, please, Storm. As I've noted, Sasol is absolutely committed to decarbonizing our business, and we believe that there needs to be a just transition that's balanced. The key 4 areas that that's formed parts of this journey is highlighted here. In the interest of time, I'm not going to go through all of it, perhaps just to mention that our renewables program is one of the biggest private IPP programs in South Africa at the moment. We are also investing more than $1 billion at the moment in gas in Mozambique as a transition feedstock for energy requirements in South Africa. And we believe that that forms an important part of the journey ahead of us. Next slide, please. In terms of our journey, as I've mentioned, we've got already committed targets for 2030. We also have a net zero ambition by 2050, and we are investing significantly in technologies that will enable us to transition beyond gas into other renewable feedstocks. Perhaps as people should know, Sasol is one of the biggest coal miners in South Africa. So we mine about 40 million tons of coal. In contrast to several other companies that export significant quantities of coal, 95% of our coal is actually used and beneficiated inside of South Africa, and we use the coal to produce fuels, oils, tars, and chemicals that improves the daily lives of South Africa. We will slowly reduce our reliance on coal, shifting to gas, and ultimately we are looking at solutions then beyond 2030 into aspects such as green hydrogen and other renewable feedstocks to continue this decarbonisation journey. Thank you. Next slide, please. Honourable members, despite our commitment to transform our business, the proposed carbon tax threatens the viability of our business. It's a bit like trying to run the comrades and to achieve a greener business, and now someone's hitting you with a big stick. The proposed carbon tax would result in a potential tax liability of around 20 to 30 billion rand per year. This is nearly triple our current South African income tax payment that we gave last year in a year of record profits. To illustrate the severity of that 20 to 30 billion rand tax liability, this would have exceeded our pre-tax profits in 5 out of the last 10 years. So significant impact on the viability of our business. The impact would be a premature closing of part or all of our South African operations, with an associated loss in employment, social development, and of course, just more broader tax receipts, which we are paying at the moment anyway. Perhaps worth noting, Chair, that this is not a SASL analysis trying to be melodramatic. This is confirmed by independent market analysts, likes of UBS, Standard Bank, ABSA, that closely tracks the financial viability of our company. And we're very happy to share more detail around the analysis performed in our own modeling and of that of the external commentators. The next slide, please. So to conclude with some practical recommendations, I think it's important that we don't only offer critique and concerns, but that we move into what is practically able to and viable for the country, given the people, planet, and profit challenges that we've got. So to reiterate, SASL is absolutely supportive of carbon pricing and that our operations must be regulated. We are not able, though, to afford the proposed carbon taxes. To that extent, we are recommending the following 5 points that we believe will moderate the impact but still allow a just transition. Firstly, we do beg that there's a reconsideration of timing of the implementation, especially given the significant local and global uncertainties. For example, to just add a factoid, I was in Germany last week visiting our German operations. We're now seeing that Germany is starting to burn coal again due to the energy shortages. South Africa is also facing significant security of supply aspects with energy. And we believe that our timing of carbon tax should really be carefully considered given the global uncertainty. Secondly, let's set a carbon trajectory that's appropriate and meaningful, with punitive taxes applied should a company breach such a path. So practically, we are running the comrades as SASL. We are absolutely committed to decarbonisation, but let's not be hit by a stick whilst we're trying to run this business. And I think more broadly, that trajectory should also be then applied to other companies in terms of the appropriateness of their journey. For example, the cement industry, the mining industry, the steel industry in South Africa, all will have different abilities to mitigate carbon emissions. And I think that point was also raised previously by some of the other co-presenters. I think thirdly, the retention of allowances is critical, and that links to the previous point.
Conclude a bit faster, Mr. Rousseau. Conclude a bit faster.
Thank you, Chair. I think the retention of allowances is critical, and it should recognise the different sectors. Fourthly, the incentives are important. So as we are running the comrades, don't hit us with a stick, offer us some water. And we've seen significant moves by the US, Europe as well, to incentivize. So ironically, the US is giving carrots before they're handing out sticks. And just lastly, there needs to be clear alignment of carbon taxes with carbon budgets and more broader climate change bills or other regulatory tools. Chair, I hope that is within my time budget, and I thank you for the opportunity. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Henry Rousseau. That was indeed within your time that we budgeted for. We'll give over now to, thank you so much. We'll give over to Mineral Council, 10 minutes, and your 10 minutes starts now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair and the committee members, for the opportunity to present on behalf of the Minerals Council. My name is Stefina Mudau. I head the Environment Department at the Minerals Council, and I will be making the presentation on behalf of the Minerals Council. Next slide, please. Chair, I won't go through the outline of the presentation. I will just swiftly go into the focus of the presentation. We have made written submission on the entire TLAB. However, our presentation today will primarily focus on the issues pertaining to the proposed amendments to the carbon tax. Perhaps our starting point would be, or departure point would be just to emphasize the Minerals Council position on climate change. I must commend BUSA has sort of painted a very good background around business position on this, which the Minerals Council pretty much aligned to that. However, just to emphasize that as the mining industry, we acknowledge the seriousness of the global challenge of climate change and also the long-term implication that this has on all life and also on the infrastructure on Earth. With these, we support the long-term goals and actions set through the Paris Agreement, Glasgow Climate Pact, under the UNFCCC, and also various South Africa's response policy measures that have been reintroduced that also includes carbon tax. And in principle, we support, as the Minerals Council, we agree with the rationale of the introduction of carbon tax and the implementation of carbon price through carbon tax. Next slide, please. As I've indicated earlier on, our presentation will pretty much focus on some of the critical concerns from the mining industry in as far as the proposed amendments to the carbon tax are concerned. And the first critical issue that we would like to highlight here is the proposed high carbon tax rate trajectory, which is effected or set at a dollar exchange currency. And the key issue of concern with regards to the setting of or the pegging of the carbon tax rate using the dollar currency, and in line with what BUSA has shared with us, we are concerned as the mining industry on the adverse and unintended consequences that this have on the mining tax payers. And as a result, our concern stems from the constant volatility of the rand-dollar exchange, which will effectively hinder the ability of the most mining companies to plan and, most importantly, budget effectively for their tax liabilities. The second issue that I want to raise here pertains to the fact that the rand has depreciated more than 100% since 2008, and consequently, setting the carbon tax rate to US dollar will result in a mammoth surge in the taxes from the mining industry in the coming years, therefore severely impacting on the viability of some of the mining operations. To this effect, we also want to mention as a matter of principle that setting carbon tax rate to rand-dollar exchange demonstrate National Treasury's lack of confidence in the South African rands as a currency. And most importantly, this contradicts the principle of certainty and predictability as highlighted in the National Treasury explanatory memorandum that accompanied the draft TLAB bill. The second point that we want to raise on the proposed carbon tax rate trajectory relates to the financial impact that the proposed higher tax rate has on the mining industry. And here I will just focus on the high-level principle to allow my colleague, Mr. Bongani Motsa, to deep dive into some preliminary results of the modeling that we've done to understand the financial impact of the proposed high tax rate on the mining industry. And as a matter of principle, here just to mention that mining companies that belongs to the Minerals Council have been implementing significant measures to reduce carbon emissions, therefore requiring them to incur substantial upfront capital investment costs, which they've absorbed so far. And adding to this, with the potential removal of the allowances, which we understand is imminent, this will erode the capital investment aimed at the implementation of other mitigation measures going forward. So the second point on the financial impact is also to state that the proposed high tax rate will severely impact on the viability of most of the mining operations that belongs to the Minerals Council, and especially those that are energy and carbon intensive, leaving them very little window for opportunity to implement the cost-effective mitigation options. The third point that I want to highlight looks at the fact that the increase in the input cost of mining companies that have been seen indirectly through the increase in supplier prices, as well as that will result in the rising carbon tax rate to which that they will be subjected to. And I think the fourth critical point here to highlight is the peculiar circumstance that the mining industry finds itself in from the perspective of the fact that the industry is a price taker and will therefore be unable to transfer the cost of carbon tax price of the commodities. And another important key consideration here is the fact that the suppliers to the mining industry have already been able to transfer their costs of carbon tax to the mining industry, which has significantly increased the cost of doing business. And with the proposed higher carbon tax rate, we are also foreseeing quite a dire impact on the viability of some of the marginal mines, and may even be enough to render such mines unprofitable and consequently lead to premature closure. Still on the financial impact of the proposed higher tax rate, here I think we just want to make a submission that we recommend that the domestic carbon price should be aligned with the international carbon price, but most importantly, this should take into consideration the South Africa's unique economic circumstances. Then moving forward to the recommendation with regards to the proposed carbon tax rate trajectory, which is set on a US dollar currency. Here, the critical recommendation that we are making is that the carbon tax rate should be set in South Africa's rand, and perhaps National Treasury look at continuing to levy carbon tax rate on an annual basis with the CPI plus 2% in the first phase. And if there is any potential increases in the carbon tax rate, this should be accompanied by additional measures that will assist and support the mining industry. For an example, incentives, grants, allowances, etc. I will now hand over to Mr. Bongani Motsa, who is the senior economist at the Minerals Council, to take you through the some initial analysis that we've done to understand the financial impact of the carbon tax on the mining industry. Thank you.
Unfortunately, Ms. Budai, you haven't left Bongani any time at all to do his part.
That is unfortunate, but I hope the part that he was going to present has been captured in writing to Treasury.
Yes.
Thank you so much. I want to thank Mineral Council for their input. Now we are with Cement and Concrete SA. Thank you, Sisi. I'm sorry for that. Okay, Cement and Concrete SA, you have your 10 minutes, which starts now. Thank you.
Hello, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, sir. You can go ahead. Thank
Yes,
you.
I'm just trying to load my presentation. Thank you, Chair. I trust you can see the presentation and you can hear me.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Good day, Honorable Chair and members. Thanks for the opportunity to present. I represent the major cement producers in the country, and I will present some of the challenges that we face with the new proposed draft amendments. Just as an introduction, the CCSA is an association that champions environmental stewardship, health and safety practices, community and stakeholder interaction to ensure that the members are indeed taking the journey of sustainable development. All our cement producers are producing cement which comply with national and international standards, which is very important to ensure that the infrastructure remains resilient. Furthermore, I think our members do take note of the entire value chain from end to end, that is from mining of the limestone right up to the cement production and concrete production subsequent to that, to ensure sustainable buildings. And also along the value chain, we look at the socioeconomic impacts, potential use of waste materials to preserve non-renewable resources, and also ensure job creation and a just transition during our journey to reduce GHG targets. Furthermore, I think we are committed to South Africa's nationally determined contribution under the Paris Agreement. And as you'll see on our website, we have committed to a sectoral net zero vision for cement production by 2050. It's quite an ambitious journey, particularly from the fact that cement production is a very hard to abate sector. At the onset, we'd like to acknowledge National Treasury for the work towards their future carbon tax regime, which is, I think, very commendable. The current effort to align different legislations is encouraging. It's quite difficult, I think, but they've certainly managed to look at some of the alignment with the GHG reporting regulations, the carbon budgets, etc. So there's still some work to be done, but I think there is some work taking place, and we appreciate that. In terms of, we'd also like to acknowledge Department of Environment, Forestry and Fisheries for aligning the GHG reporting requirements to support the carbon tax implementation, and also supporting alignment of different policy instruments, including the carbon pricing policy. So as a policy in terms of carbon tax, I think the CCSA recognizes the use of carbon pricing and carbon tax as an important policy instrument. So that's quite important. However, I think in terms of our cement industry, it is important that members note that the cement sector is most capital intensive, it is most energy intensive, it is also most carbon intensive. This is mainly due to more than half of our emissions coming from limestone, which is as a result of chemistry and which can't be really mitigated if you're using limestone. And then I think a second major contributor of GHG emissions is our thermal heat. South Africa is coal dependent in terms of energy, and more than 40% of our GHG emissions come from coal energy. So I think we have a complex sector here, which is hard to abate, and this is recognized internationally. I think in addition to that, as I mentioned, which is a very hard to abate sector, and therefore there are very limited mitigation opportunities. But I'd like to add that we have begun our journey on reducing GHG emissions over 10 years ago, and we do compare favorably in many respects internationally. One of the other problems we have is trade exposure. There are cheap imports taking place, and this certainly has an impact on our viability in the country. Domestic production capacity is quite low. I think at the moment we are producing or selling 50% of our capacity of 22.7 million tons. And then we have about 1 million tons being imported. So I think it's a stressed environment from a business perspective. We also contribute quite a bit to the regional economic development. For example, the limestone mines are located in selected hubs in the country. Lichtenwood hub is an important area, and much of the regional economic development does depend on the cement sector for employment and other matters. I think another important area is sustainable development and resilience. Is an important focus area of our members. So I think although we agree with carbon pricing, we believe that the $20 and $30 is very, very steep, and National Treasury should review the numbers. But should the 20 and 30 be retained, I think we have major concerns regarding probably the allowances that would be kept or taken away. I think first one is electricity price neutrality commitment is only until 2025. So there will be a price throughput from electricity, and that's going to increase our electricity price in terms of production costs. Trade exposure, as I mentioned previously, we're going to have loss of competitiveness because of cheap imports. Although trade exposure has been reflected in the budget speech, where allowance is increased from 30 to 50% for trade exposure. However, we're not sure what the bands would look like from 50%. And it is very likely that cement sector once again may not enjoy the full trade exposure allowance, as is the case presently. So I think that pass-through of electricity is an area important. A trade exposure is another important area. Process allowances, the budget speech was silent on process allowances. As I've indicated, more than 50% comes from chemistry, which cannot be mitigated. And therefore, I think there needs to be a special arrangement for sectors such as cement, where hard-to-abate sectors cannot really mitigate process allowance by 2030. Just to give you an idea about the current tax rates that have been proposed, the carbon tax included in the variable cost of sales, if you just look at the variable cost, it's going to increase by tenfold by 2030, and this certainly is not sustainable and viable for the cement producers. This would basically translate to a price increase of 6 to 8% above CPI by 2030, which I think is also hard for consumers. So if the sector would be unable to pass this through to consumers, the domestic industry would be more uncompetitive relative to imports, and it would be unsustainable to continue operating. And this is notwithstanding the best efforts to carbonize in terms of our commitment to net zero by 2050. So in summary, I think what I'd like to say is that the rapidly increasing carbon tax rate, the rapidly increasing electricity price as we're seeing, the rapidly increasing coal price, the greenhouse gas mitigation effort costs, the lack of government grants and imminent removal of the various allowances or deductions could have major implications to the viability of the cement industry in South Africa. So we'd like to say that the principle of common but differentiated responsible has been noted as South Africa is a developing country and South Africa is vulnerable to cheap imports. While we often refer to the EU, it is to be noted that the EU is well advanced and ahead of the curve and have enjoyed many incentives in the past to decarbonize over many years, more than 10 years. And thus they're able to determine standards and benchmarks which are very ambitious for South Africa. A case in point is the adoption of these benchmarks for cement in the South African green taxonomy. We are not sure how these benchmarks would be interpreted by the financial institutions in South Africa. And therefore, once again, the benchmarks may pose a challenge in terms of our mitigation cost curves. The CCSA members support our NDC and notes that it is based on various conditions being met to support our mitigation actions. While we consider and recognize carbon tax a policy instrument, its implementation must consider challenges facing the hard-to-abate sectors and provide an enabling environment to ensure sustainability of the cement sector. So I think in the conclusion, Chair, I'd like to say that the work done by National Treasury towards a future carbon tax regime is commendable in terms of various alignments taking place. And I think the trajectory noted, although we are not happy with the rates, the current effort to align different legislations is encouraging. The current effort to promote ease of doing business without compromising the environment, ensuring sustainable development goals is noted. The national submitted NDC relies on appropriate technical, technological, and fiscal support. And I think National Treasury needs to take note of this, particularly for the hard-to-abate sectors. So what we would like to recommend that the National Treasury note the challenges facing our hard-to-abate sector, which is also the most capital-intensive, most energy-intensive, carbon-intensive, and vulnerable to cheap imports. They consider the principle of differentiated approach to allowances for the hard-to-abate sectors. They facilitate fiscal support for appropriate mitigation actions. Internationally, the hard-to-abate sectors are looking at carbon capture and storage, which could go into billions of dollars. I'm not sure.
Cut to the chase, please.
Thank you. I'll be a minute.
Cut to the chase.
Yes. Cement sector requires extensive support on allowances and incentives to remain in business. The rapidly increasing tax rates, etc., I think needs to be addressed. And I think we need to note that the internationally cement producers enjoy significant allowances, and the published carbon price rate certainly may not be effective price and actual cost to business. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you so much to the Cement and Concrete SA. I want to really appreciate the problem that's facing you, because time is always an enemy. Thank you so much for your presentation. Now we give over to ITTCC. Your 10 minutes, ITC, it's Andrew's host. Starts now. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to present the industry task team on climate change comments. So in terms of, I'm Dr. Andres Gous, and I'm the co-vice chair of the ITTCC. The ITTCC represents the energy-intensive industries that will likely be affected by carbon tax significantly. And overall, our general position is that we support decarbonization of the economy, and we would like to commend the government for the ambitious NDC that has been put forward as the guiding beacon to achieve the decarbonization. And we also acknowledge the role that an effective carbon price, carbon tax plays as part of penalties and incentives to reach this. And we therefore support that this price should be carefully implemented with a trajectory that is complemented with several incentives. But it remains essential that it does not come at the expense of industry that is currently in transition and the realization of a just transition for our economy. So in terms of our submission, we want to first highlight the impact that the proposed rate increases could have on the economy as well as industry. As everyone's aware, South Africa's economy and the industry currently attempts to recover from the impacts of COVID-19. And the proposed carbon tax rate introduces a highly punitive tax rate that provides little relief measures that supports it. So we as industry see that this proposed uplift in the tax rate is a bit too soon and high for the industry to absorb at this moment, and this could lead to unintended consequences. Some of the internal modeling by some of our members showed that they might prematurely have to shut down some or all of their operations, and this could also lead to some critical services or products being replaced by imports. This was also mentioned for the cement industry, where there is cheaper products available from outside. So this would mean that the import countries where the products are imported from will get the benefit to their economy and not necessarily South Africa. Then to also, as mentioned by the cement industry, we would also suggest that a single national carbon price across all sectors is not necessarily the best way to approach this, since carbon price gives the signal to switch to lower carbon processes or substitute for different products. But different sectors, different industries, and different technologies will each have different prices that needs to be understood to achieve this transition. So the IPTCC's proposal is that for the extended first phase, that carbon price should still increase with the CPI plus 2%, as mentioned in the Carbon Tax Act currently, and that a study be conducted on the feasibility of implementing a sector-based carbon tax design as opposed to a general national carbon price. Then we also support and appreciate the extension of the Section 12, our energy incentive. However, the viability of this incentive, we feel, should be reviewed, since the rate of it hasn't been increased since its implementation, and the extended end date still ultimately indicates that it might fall away, leaving little to no way to currently receive the carrot side of the equation and only beaten by the stick while we're running this comrades. So currently there is limited alternative support available for us to decarbonize and to follow a just transition. There is several alternative measures available, like implementing standards or regulations on the efficiency of materials and the carbon content, having ring fencing the carbon tax income and all those things. But ultimately, we feel there should be more support towards decarbonization and the just transition. So our proposal is that the Section 12, our energy efficiency incentive, should be reviewed to ensure that it remains a viable and attractive option for industry, while also expanding the measures that is available to industry to decarbonize. Then a third point was also touched on by other submitters, and that's the electricity carbon price neutrality that we currently experience, and we appreciate the extension of it until the end of 2025. However, this pass-through poses a significant financial risk for energy-intensive industries as well as the general public. In the end, this will lead to a double taxation for industry, since they'll be liable for their own carbon tax and that of electricity supply if a carbon tax can be passed through. Eskom has already noted in their annual report that this might be a 4 to 5% increase on the year-on-year tariff just related to carbon tax. And modeling by one of our members showed that the pass-through can exceed R2.50 per kilowatt hour of electricity in 2030 if the current rates of $30 by 2030 is implemented. And also, all sectors cannot pass through or has a limited pass-through available to them on the carbon tax. This is due to several reasons, such as customer affordability, if we look at the electricity sector, regulated fuel prices for liquid fuels, and that the mining sector receives their prices from external factors and they're not in control of it. So overall, we propose an in-depth study to determine the impact and consequences of a carbon tax pass-through from the electricity sector, as well as analyze the impact on sectors that's not able to pass through carbon tax to their customers. We also support the inclusion of sequestrated activities in the carbon tax formula, but we would like to propose that this be extended to all sectors and not only keep it limited to the paper and pulp industry to benefit from it. This will allow multiple sectors and companies to use the land and assets within their control to also receive this benefit. Then the final 2 points of our submission supports that of previous submissions, where we propose that the carbon tax should be put forward in South African rand terms, just to eliminate the uncertainty that comes with having it stated as a US dollar, which is highly unpredictable due to numerous factors and requires complex strategies to adopt hedging and taking into account the general volatility of the international world. Then finally, we would like to let the draft TLAB please just mention the budget speech that will fall away. It's unclear on what's expected, and the climate change bill currently being considered proposes changes to the allowances and the associated tax rate, but there's currently no indication of how everything will fit together in the end, and even to what point things will be retained. So in conclusion, the ITTCC supports a well-implemented carbon price as a mechanism towards realizing South Africa's commitments towards climate change. We aim to highlight concerns and make recommendations to improve the carbon tax aspects that's included in the TLAB. And with that, I would like to thank you for the opportunity.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Andres House, for that input by ITTCC. And now we're off to the Chemical and Allied Industries Association. The Chemical and Allied Industries Association. Over to you. Your 10 minutes starts now.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just going to share my screen. You see my screen, Chair?
Yes, we can see your screen. Thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the Honourable members for the opportunity to present Kaya's inputs today on the draft TLAB relating to the Carbon Tax Act proposals and amendments. My name is Ben Malhuber. I'm Head of Policy Analysis at the Chemical and Allied Industries Association. The chemical industry really touches every part of the economy, Chair. We are a strong contributor to manufacturing as well as gross domestic product and employment, and we show strong multiply effects both downstream and upstream in the economy from these contributions. So we are an integral sector to both upstream and downstream parts of the economy. The intention of, sorry, I need to change slides. The intention of Kaya's policy engagements with government is to assist with crafting the most effective, least cost policy to drive the reduction in greenhouse gas emissions with as little negative impact on business sustainability, employment, and GDP as possible there. Although it's recognized that South Africa's greenhouse gas emissions are one of the highest in the world per capita, they also appear to have peaked, Chair. If you look at the recent draft 8 national greenhouse gas emissions reporting inventory that was recently published for comment. Given this, if you also take that the direct chemical industry, industrial process and product use greenhouse gas emissions don't feature much in this national inventory, we're sitting really at a contribution of about 1% of the national inventory. We therefore feel that it's important that there need to be differential pressures applied with the carbon tax as it appears to be continuing to be implemented, and as much flexibility as possible needs to be provided. We think by reconsidering allowances and also increasing the flexibility of offsetting opportunities to a very, very large degree. These differential pressures that we speak about here could be informed by analyzing least cost mitigation, which can be seen through the Department of Forestry, Fisheries and Environment's work a number of years ago that has since been updated twice to reflect mitigation potential in different sectors of the economy. There really needs to be a strong, much stronger intergovernmental approach to these climate change related engagements, and there needs to be stronger stakeholder participations in working towards achieving the country's needs and to contribute to a global solution. And this can really only happen through more engagement, Chair, than is currently taking place, both with stakeholders in the market and intergovernmentally. Just because of time, I'm going to skip through some slides. What we would like to address next is sorry, I'm just going to the right slide over here. With the tax trajectory proposed at the moment, Chair, we feel that only bookend scenarios can be estimated if we consider zero allowances in the very short term being a reality. There's no allowance information and there's no carbon budget methodology finalization from the Department of Forestry, Fisheries and Environment. So it becomes very difficult in this system that should be integrated to be able to refine estimates. And this leads, as you'll see a little bit later, to assumptions of severe impacts which are compounded when possible mitigation is limited. And we'll speak to that a little bit later. So I draw your attention to that. Tax liability, Chair, will ultimately in the second phase be dependent on where carbon budget is set and the rate of the tax above and or below the budget. Tax below the budget being an important policy discussion that we need to take forward quite urgently, as the Carbon Tax Act at the moment only deals with the taxation of all relevant emissions. Other matters that we feel are very important to be finalized as soon as possible to add to investor and regulatory certainty is the matter of annualization between the link with the carbon budget and the carbon tax. We don't know how that is going to be reconciled on an annual basis because of tax policy, while the carbon budget cycle is on a 5-year period. How do we ensure that there's sufficient cash flow to be able to ensure our liabilities and our responsibilities? Secondly, how are legislative amendments also linked with the national greenhouse gas emissions reporting regulations going to be resolved, because there's a lag between these TLAB, TALAB processes and the Department of Forestry, Fisheries and Environment's greenhouse gas reporting regulation updates, and we have a proposal for that as well later. Point here, Chair, is that these may not be urgent considerations for government, and we have raised them before, but they most certainly are important considerations for business right now. Based on the information available, Chair, companies are estimating dire consequences for this rate that's currently proposed being implemented. They are estimating 9 times, 12 times, 75 times, 250% increases in carbon tax liability by 2030, and this isn't even considering the trajectory to 2050. These estimates were received from CAI member companies that are relatively small greenhouse gas greenhouse gas emitters. And Chair, please stress that most of the members that have carbon tax liability have already mitigated greenhouse gas emissions to a large degree. Some are even operating best in their class from a global perspective. Furthermore, these greenhouse gas emissions are from sectors that form a minority of the country's emissions. The following are just a few of many paraphrased examples of the sentiment that Kaya is fielding, and we really need to consider this in terms of businesses will close. It's going to impact competitiveness, employment, poverty. How low is low enough? Because we've done what we can do. We've already implemented the feasible mitigation in the market. We cannot pursue growth and capital investment. These are just some of pages of inputs received. So these sentiments show that the tax and its trajectory, along with uncertainty, Chair, is further eroding investor confidence and business sustainability. Companies that are already doing what they can or have implemented ongoing projects to reduce greenhouse gas emissions voluntarily should be reconsidered for inclusion in the tax net. And this can simply be done by delinking the greenhouse gas regulations to carbon tax liability and fully implementing what Treasury really wanted, that was to see the tax on the big emitters where there can be mitigation. One must remember, Chair, that the greenhouse gas national inventory is meant to be as comprehensive as possible to capture all emissions for the country, and that wasn't the intention of the tax. Companies who have already mitigated emissions, greenhouse gas emissions, to the extent possible, Chair, they are part of the Responsible Care Initiative. It's a voluntary initiative of the chemical industry, and they have good track records in sustainability. So just in short, I'd like to come to the last slide. We've mentioned all the most important points, Chair. So I'd just like to highlight the need for further engagement. Just go to that slide. We'd like to highlight the need for further engagement, Chair. We need to focus on ensuring that growth is possible for the country given this policy. We need to delink the tax from the Department of Forestry, Fisheries and Environment's greenhouse gas reporting regulations. We support that it's delinked from the US exchange rate because this adds to uncertainty, and the full mitigation system needs to be put on the table by government so that there can be further engagement, including on a much more flexible offsetting policy and ring-fencing policy by Treasury. And we're happy to engage further. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you so much to Mr. Glenn Malhebe from SAISA. Thank you for the presentation. And now we give over to our last presenter from the stakeholders, Mr. Spenik.
Thank you, Chair. Just from ArcelorMittal, we just like to put our presentation.
Can we get?
Can you hear me?
Oh yes, go ahead.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everybody. Dear Honourable Chairman and Honourable members of this committee, I wish to thank you for the opportunity to comment on the draft Taxation Laws Amendment Bill. TLAB, I am Werner Venter, the Chief Technical Officer of ArcelorMittal South Africa, and we are also part of the ArcelorMittal International Group. On our first slide, ArcelorMittal South Africa is the largest steel producer in South Africa with integrated facilities that convert iron ore to steel located in Gauteng, KwaZulu-Natal and in the Western Cape, where unfortunately our operations are mothballed due to unsustainability. Our parent company conducts steel making operations in various jurisdictions globally, and ArcelorMittal International participate in the corresponding carbon markets where they exist. The conversion of iron to steel relies on the use of coal as a reductant, and our direct Scope 1 greenhouse gas emissions per annum is significant. But we are very excited about alternative technologies that's currently being researched, and it's envisaged that a meaningful reduction in greenhouse gas will be achieved through the application of these various technologies on a large and a very, hopefully, a feasibility scale. AMSA, specifically, we have developed our own roadmap to reduce the greenhouse gas, to set targets for 2030, as well as set targets for net zero for 2050. Our ArcelorMittal International Group also have clear communicated targets of about 25% by 2030 and net zero by 2050 as well. Currently, we are already in feasibility as well as development of certain of our projects in South Africa that we want to implement, as well as across the globe from ArcelorMittal International. It is evident that National Treasury wishes to steer South Africa in a direction of high carbon prices, similar to the few jurisdictions elsewhere in the world where we operate. What we are everywhere seeing is that high carbon prices are now considered in isolation without understanding the wider context of which are implemented elsewhere. Our comments mention various examples, especially from regions where we operate in the EU and Canada, to illustrate that the proclaimed carbon tax is not the price that's being paid in the end, due to various allowances that are afforded to energy-intensive and hard-to-abate sectors, which are also prone to carbon leakage. Such allowances will continue beyond 2030 elsewhere. In contrast to South Africa, where the minister has stated the allowance will rapidly fall away towards 2030. The bill, unfortunately, only stipulates high carbon prices going forward till 2030, but it's silent on the allowances, which creates major uncertainty for all of us that has commented today. We would definitely rely on allowances beyond 2030 to remain sustainable, as most alternative technologies is currently being researched only for the steel industry and may only become feasible and really available beyond 2030, even closer to 2035. We also need grants and subsidies in addition, like we see elsewhere in the world. For an example, the US has in August, where there's currently no carbon, they've proclaimed in August, they have announced that the state support in the form of grants and tax breaks relating to decarbonization initiatives. When you look in South Africa, in some places we say that the Section 12L of the Income Tax Act relating to energy efficiency may offer relief from a decarbonization perspective, but the opposite rather is true, that when you decarbonize the steel industry, you might need as much as 4 times the amount of electricity that you will need. In our second slide, in case of ArcelorMittal with Scope 1 emissions in excess of about 10 million tons per annum, the tax liability with the allowance being phased out by 2030 is a scary number of billions per year. Even if we reduce our carbon emissions by 50%, the number is still extreme in the billions of rands. Most certainly, further thought needs to go into how important sectors like iron and steel, and also from the others that is mentioned today, be kept alive, as our products will remain important for this transition in South Africa to take place. AMSA need to invest in alternative energy. We need to invest in alternative processes, and we will then have the requirement also to pay the extreme high carbon tax. And this will make us not sustainable. Our sector is also seeing a lot of steel being imported into the country from jurisdictions where no carbon price or only a low carbon price is being levied. Imports amount to roughly 30% of local consumption. Steel is also found in many finished goods, for an example, spades, wheelbarrows, where there's no carbon being considered at the moment. With the proposed increase in carbon prices, our competitiveness is seriously compromised. Carbon prices needs to be implemented cautiously till a broader implementation of carbon prices is witnessed on a global scale on imported products. Protectionist measures like carbon border adjustments could be an option, and which are being debated in various jurisdictions globally, also in the areas where we participate globally. In conclusion, Chair, we find the TLAB totally lacking from a support measure perspective. And with such undertaking being created, an important sector is put at risk, not to even mention future investments. We trust that the draft TLAB will be amended to take our concerns on board, and that South African carbon tax structures is more aligned to what is experienced elsewhere across the globe, and take into consider our own unique circumstances, like the lack of electricity, lack of green energy, the lack of green hydrogen, and many other critical factors that in time we will have to overcome to assist us with the decarbonization journeys that we have embarked on. Thank you so much, Chair.
Thank you so much to Aselo Mitchell for that presentation. It means a lot that stakeholders are able to come to the committee and make these presentations, so that when Treasury comes with responses, we are also able to be the mouth of the various stakeholders that have presented in the committee, just like the chairperson has done on the issue of the currency, for example. And I can see that honorable members do not have comments or questions to make, and probably that is also due to the fact that we have run out of time. However, once again, we just want to thank the various stakeholders for their inputs here today, and Treasury is also part of this platform, apart from the fact that you also have written to them on the various issues that you want to raise on both the TLAB and the TLAB. Can you check for announcements?
Sorry for that. Next week, Tuesday, we'll be getting responses from National Treasury on the rates bill. And on Wednesday, we'll be getting responses from National Treasury for TALAB and TLAB. So the next... Can you hear me, ma'am?
I can hear you, Tebuko, loud and clear.
Oh, yes.
We have a meeting on Tuesday and another one on Wednesday.
Yes.
But for TLAB and TLAB, it's Wednesday.
Yes.
So it's the rates bill on Tuesday.
Yes, ma'am.
That is loud and clear. Thank you so much. I want to thank you, Tebuko, and the officials, all the officials from the legislature, the stakeholders that have taken the time to come and present, honorable members, as well as Treasury that is part of this kind of meeting. We thank you so much. We hope you have a good day. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, everybody.
Sure.
Malibongwe.
Recording stopped.